Today, we are talking about what makes great documentation for marketplace apps. And I'd love to say it's as simple as talking about your features, but if you do your documentation really well, it can become a part of your growth engine for your marketplace business. And with that, I'm Peter.
Kate.
And this is Marketplace Growth by Accoil. What makes great documentation? That's the question for today. Self-service is the usual suspect. This is how a lot of documentation and service desks are measured and built, right? It's, can we get users in? Can we get them what they want and then get them out? And to me, that's table stakes. It's just a must for your documentation, right? You want it to be easy and useful. However, it's not going to impress me as a buyer necessarily. And so what we're going to explore today is the other parts that have to be there to make amazing documentation. So Kate, I'm going to throw it to you and help us answer that question.
What makes great documentation? Love good documentation, Peter. So there's a couple of important things I think we need to be doing. One is, as always, you need to be thinking about who are your end users in mind. So walk in their shoes. Think about what is it that what would be important to them. Make your documentation proactive. Don't be reactive. Constantly be thinking, how do I keep updating and working this? Because often a lot of documentation very much lags improvements or tweaks that could be done to just make life easier for your customers or prospective customers. So a big one for me is you need to make sure that you have assigned someone to look after it. Again, very obvious. So I'm going to talk about a lot of obvious stuff today, but a lot of people are just not doing it. So you need to keep it fresh and accurate. And what I mean by that is you need to really be connecting with the different parts of your business where you're getting your inputs from your customers, and you need to get them to tell you what's happening, and then you incorporate it and put it into your documentation.
And
Kind of makes sense?
It does. I think what you mentioned before is proactive versus reactive. And is this what you mean by proactive, where you've got someone assigned to this, they're listening, and it becomes this sort of cycle, right? Where I heard that seems helpful. That'll go into an FAQ. That'll go into something instead of waiting for someone to complain. Like we've seen documentation or maybe a question come from a customer that your documentation says you do this, but it actually doesn't. I think that's a good example of maybe being a bit more proactive and keeping up with the features and the product itself.
Great example. And I think too, when we used to run the support, that was one of the things I used to go in and say, is there anything that's coming through where people are asking us that we could be putting in our documentation? And then we would feed it through to the content, Jen, our content person, and away we'd go. So you just keep everything lock and step is the way in my mind, because let's just keep remembering what we're here for with documentation. We're here to reassure the evaluator, reassure the customer that you know what you're talking about. Reassure them. It's about trust. Should I put my money with this mob? Are they going to disappear? Second one is you wanting to sell. You want to put yourself in the best light and sell. And the last one is you want to solve. So reassure, sell, and solve need to be top of mind in my mind. So walk in your customer's shoes, walk in their shoes, and then think, what does it look like from the reassurance perspective? What does it look like from the selling perspective? What does it look like from the solve perspective? And then the things like, for example, demonstrating your attributes of trust. For example, I'm a big believer in telling them the stuff that doesn't work. So we call it limitations on our documentation. But the amount of feedback we used to get back saying, well, thank you for telling us what doesn't work, and then what the workaround is. Or if it doesn't work, then potentially you're signaling to us, this product may not be right for you, which again establishes trust. For anyone else watching on that, looking at that issue, they go, okay, these guys are feeding on this stuff. So this is the way. And then I'd probably also say you need to make sure you give them a place to say, hey, we're listening. And so you do have the contact us, you do have that, but you need to have expressions. For example, you can say, customers have recently been telling us this. This is, we've updated accordingly. So you need to show that you're listening and actually keep it fresh. Don't have it months and months without nothing happening. And of course, use cases. Nothing like a killer use case. Got anything to add on that, Pete? I kind of really hogged the limelight on that one.
I think there's a lot actually to unpack in that. And I think it's all practical advice. If someone were to ask you, how would I go about doing this? If we're starting from scratch today, how would you roll this out? Let's do two different scenarios. If you're just starting as a marketplace partner, what's priority number one in that situation? And then also, let's say you've got an established marketplace vendor, already have a good amount of customers, you're getting support tickets. What would be priority for them? So let's maybe start with somebody new to the marketplace. What would you prioritize there?
I'd be prioritizing the problem you're solving in your ideal segment, customer segment, and then building your documentation around that. So not trying to be all things to all people, but I notice with people starting out, businesses starting out, is they get very, this is what we do, this is why we're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you need to be much more mindful of what the customer's going through. Like, I got this problem and this is how I'm fixing it. So I often think new starters don't have enough problem orientation and I think aren't clear enough about what their product does and doesn't do. Because that's just as important.
If you were to look at some documentation, what would you be looking for? Like, so if there is someone that's new in the marketplace right now and thing watching this video, they're going to go back and open their documentation page, what would they be looking for to say we're either not problem slash solution oriented enough, or, like what kind of indications would they be looking for?
So are you using the words that resonate with your customers? So what are the key words that are coming up in your customer conversations? If you haven't had any customer conversation, go have them. What are they saying? So I would be then replaying that through my words and my content. I think there are some specific things that you always have to have. Things like about us, things like the features. If you've got competitors, don't be afraid to do the competitive feature analysis. Have some limitations in there. If you've got specific FAQs, FAQs is I always have an FAQ because it's a great place to dump stuff when you don't, where it fits. So I think there's some key segments you've always got to do. And I can hear people saying, oh yeah, but we have all of those. And I say, yes, but do you really have them through the lens of the customer, or are you just regurgitating stuff out? So I see lots of websites with lots and lots and lots and lots of documentation, and you get lost. So it's about really understanding who is your primary audience and how are you solving for it. So that's in the first scenario. Can I just say, you might have a groovy image, you might have groovy branding, but the content, I'm sounding old now, aren't I?
Groovy, baby.
Oh, God. Couldn't I have chosen a better word? But,
no,
I kind of
like
sit there. I'm a function over form girl. Like, I'm a function girl. Like, make the thing, just tell me what I need to know. And I've just had 4 days of interviewing customers for something else. And everything is about just give me the tool and let me know how. I don't want to know the ins and outs. I just want to do my job. And the tool is a side thing. And it's no different with apps in the Atlassian Marketplace. Just let me get on with my job. That's it.
So that's the making your documentation easy to use and addressing those questions. Transitioning to the other scenario. So an established marketplace vendor, been around for a little while, documentation's maybe a bit more expansive. In that scenario, what would you be looking for if you were to come into a company and say, we're going to look at this? Where would you start?
I would be looking to see all of your inputs across your company about how well you are self-serve answering the questions of people. I would also be getting feedback from customers, and I'd also actually be asking someone who's not too close to it and say, take a look at our documentation. What do you think? So I'd probably be saying, doing an audit, the dreaded audit, can we tighten fresh stuff up? And usually I would think after about 6 months, everything always needs a refresh. And then sometimes you just throw everything out again and start again, which we often did. I think we did about 3 documentation start overs as our product grew more sophisticated and grew more mission critical for enterprise. So I think we need to think of the scale perspective as well. So if you're trying to go to our enterprise and you're literally only scaling into it, then you really need your documentation to be swish, really, really swish. Yeah. So all the security statements and just making it easy for people to do business. Yeah.
Tying this all back to like the growth and sales side, right? Like,
Yeah.
good documentation does play a part in that. We've talked about how you put your documentation together, what you're looking for. What's the
Yep.
loop then in sales? I mean, you mentioned trust and security and all that sort of stuff. And we're always big on, looking bigger than you are. And I think documentation is a huge part in that, is looking, as you said, nice and schmick, right? Everything looks good. It's all there. But how does that loop back into sales, let's say?
Well, the self-serve sales is that you actually answer all their questions and so they feel reassured. You also have your call to actions. You also have good call to actions so that you get the loop in. Evaluations, I loved people when they asked questions in support. Oh my God, that's such a Monty in my mind, because then you flow back to them. If you're helping them, they'll talk to you. You say, how are you using, I just want to check how you're using our tool, because there may be some tips or hints to make it actually work better. Oh, and by the way, these are some use cases that similar sort of profile companies use, which always got great replies from people going, oh, this is really, really helpful. I feel like I got enough now to go to my boss to convince them to take X, Y, Z. And that's another one put on your documentation to convince your boss stuff, informal and formal.
I love those. One point I'd add to all of that is going back to that sort of proactive stance on your documentation. And I think we did this really well with Proforma, maybe in part because it was a smaller team, but it's worth putting the systems in place to say, I heard this from a customer. Is it addressed in our documentation somewhere? And as Kate said before, if it doesn't feel like it has a home, an FAQ is a great place to dump that stuff. I shouldn't say dump it, put it. And I think it's important to remember,
let's be honest, dump it, Pete.
Yeah, dump
let's
it.
Be honest.
Okay. We're all friends here, right? The most important part of that is that it feels like you might get to the end at some point, right? Like we'll answer all the questions, but you never actually will. And that's not to say that as an intimidating thing, but customers will always come up with something new. Just when you think you've gotten all the FAQs answered, someone pops up with something else that would probably be interesting to other customers. So I feel like it's important to sort of underscore that this should be
just a journey,
constantly evolving. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a journey. And it's one of the ones that you've just got to keep focusing on. And just 2 words, you're out to eliminate friction. You demonstrate, 4 words actually, demonstrate value and eliminate friction. That's what you need to do with your documentation.
Something else that just came to mind is internal friction. Having done support, I found our documentation to be so incredibly helpful as someone that was new to support and B, newer to the product itself too, was having that internally. We had our own documentation, right? And so as someone, me sitting on support, answering questions, if it's been asked before, we've cataloged it and captured it in a way that I could just turn that around and say, yep, here's your answer, done.
Yeah.
And I think the mindset that we had was never answer the same question twice. That once we have an answer for that, document it, whether publicly or internally. And then it just made life so much easier. And me being on the marketing side of things, I was a lot more confident being on support. Still nervous. I remember the first day I did it.
I loved watching you when you're on support.
Sweating buckets somehow.
But it's great.
But that I think is I think maybe an underutilized aspect of good documentation is turning that inwards and letting your team use it as well.
I think that's actually your principle, is if you can make your documentation as external as possible so that then you can just point stuff and it cuts down on your version control, because that's another thing, people, it's version control. Jeez, does that drive you nutty? Yeah. Yeah. And just the process of getting your content up and happening.
It's all systems though, right? And it's all doable. And I think it's worth spending the time to do it. So I do think documentation is really critical, especially if you are looking to go up to enterprise. It's a huge indicator of how well the business is doing. Maturity, and that signal that you're going to be around for a while and that they can trust you.
Yeah.
I'm going to segue us off of documentation. If you're watching and you have questions about specific parts of the documentation, please leave a comment below or hit us up, head over to accoil.co. We're happy to answer questions. You can email us, go to LinkedIn, find us there. I do want to touch on one thing I'm going to steal the show now. This is one of my pet peeves when it comes to documentation that I'm going to try not to use too strong a language here, but if your documentation doesn't link back to either your marketplace listing or your marketing website, like your homepage, you're missing out on a lot of potential traffic back to those pages, and you're frustrating me. So if you care about me, you'll put a link back to your homepage or your marketplace listing page from your documentation, because odds are people are coming from one of those two places and will want to go back. And if you want people to buy from you, they need to be on the marketplace, right? So that's just one thing that I always look for is, can I get out of here if I'm on someone's documentation page?
Yeah. And you miss the opportunity, let's face it. We were actually yesterday, we saw a couple. Exactly. It was like, wow, no call to action.
Yeah. And if you've got different tabs open and all that sort of stuff, but so make it easy for people to get back to the point of sale for your app. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
We also have some additional resources, not from Atlassian this time, but we did some snooping around and some research on this topic, and we're not the only ones that think documentation is important, thankfully. We found some good articles from ChartMogul and a community called Write the Docs, which is a community for people who care about documentation.
I think one of the big things is we'd really love to hear from you about what you want in terms of topics. What are your hot spots? We've been getting some quite juicy ones, but let us know. And if you don't tell us, we're just going to keep picking what we want to talk about.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Marketplace Growth with Accoil. Remember to hit that subscribe button, click the bell so that you get notified when we do launch these videos. We're doing it weekly. And again, to just underscore what Kate said, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Bye and take care, everybody.